Men, did you know that all of us have breast tissue and 400 of us in the UK and 2,800 in the US are diagnosed with breast cancer every year? And yet, almost all of the information, support, and awareness materials around the disease are aimed at women. Perhaps understandably, because there is a far greater number of them who get it, but the fact remains those men who are stricken with the disease have very little to work with in terms of information and support. That is something that this week's guest, James Richards, hopes to change. He is one such man, and he is the founder of a new non-profit called Moobs, Moobs, which is aimed at breaking that barrier and raising awareness and increasing the information available to men who are diagnosed with breast cancer. It's a really interesting conversation. We get into his journey, and it's a very harrowing journey as well. But we also talk about some of the more exciting technologies available in the treatment of not just breast cancer, but cancers generally. And in that part of the conversation, I hope you will see some real cause for optimism as well. So, without further delay, this is the Complete Tech Heads with me, Tom Edwards, and this is my conversation with James Richards.
Complete Tech Heads.
Hello, friends. This week I am here with James Richards, who is the founder of a new non-profit dedicated to awareness of male breast cancer. James, thanks so much for joining me. So we already know each other. We used to go to school together, and we were in a band together called Dead Wax, who were, as I'm sure you recall yourself, very awesome. So look, do you want to give me a bit of background on you and your journey to creating this non-profit Moobs?
Of course, thanks, Tom. So sort of a bit of background on me. So I'm a publicist by trade. And back in January, I was sort of in a meeting, crossed my arms and felt a sort of small kind of lump, about around the size of a pea. And didn't really think much of it at the time. It was only because a colleague had said, I should get in and get it checked out, because a few years earlier he had found a lump, he had got it checked, and that was the first time he'd sort of heard that male breast cancer was a thing. And even though he told me about that, I didn't really give it much thought. I actually thought, it was January, everyone's trying to sort of lose those holiday pounds. So I was hitting the gym quite a lot, and I thought it was maybe something to do with that. And I just kind of got on with my day job. And it was probably about 4 or 5 weeks later that I booked an appointment. Went to my GP, and the GP really wasn't concerned about it. Didn't think I had anything to worry about it, but was going to refer me anyway. So I went to a breast clinic in Kingston Hospital, Royal Marsden, and again, the first consultant wasn't particularly concerned about it. She put me into an ultrasound, and it was all very sort of jolly. I kind of always try to see the light in sort of dark situations. And like I said, I didn't think men could get breast cancer, so I wasn't really worried. And then you could sense the air kind of being sucked out the room, and I was sort of telling jokes all the way through it, and then all of a sudden they weren't landing, and I was like, well, it can't be my content, because my content's superb, as you'll know, Tom. But it felt like it had just been sucked out, and they took a biopsy, which wasn't uncommon. And then I went back to the consultant, and the consultant essentially just said, look, we found something maybe a bit suspicious, so we're going to send that off for a biopsy, and we wanted to send you in for a mammogram. And then before I went into the mammogram, she actually said, the results might take about 2 weeks, and you should probably bring someone with you. It actually took 3 days, which I thought wasn't really good. And then I went to get my results, and I was told I had breast cancer. And I think the thing about this is I was processing the fact that I had cancer, first of all, and I think the element breast didn't really come into it until I was in the car on the way back, and I read the literature. And the first bullet point was wear a loose-fitting bra. And so I sort of joked to my mum, and I was like, right, it's off to M&S to get that loose-fitting bra. And I make light of it, but it kind of made me realise that there's a real lack of tailored support around male breast cancer, and this I sort of identified as a bit of an awareness problem. So for me, it was I need to do something to raise awareness of this. And before I got my full diagnosis, I was told to expect a terminal diagnosis. And for me to be, finding a lump in January, and this was February, and being told that, fortunately the news turned out good. I had 10 days wait, which was just terrible. But I sort of thought, if it can spread that quickly, it's really important that we kind of get the message out and that men can get breast cancer. And, sort of looking online, you realise that, this is a myth that's sort of, a dangerous myth that's perpetuated by media, but also by the breast cancer charities themselves. They don't put up enough information about this, and the information that you find, it usually means it's too late. So for me, I had to do something about it, and that's how Moobs came into existence. It was the awareness side, but also to find some support, because you're looking at 55,000 diagnoses for women each year compared to 370. So that number is, very, very small.
Yeah.
But each of those numbers is a story. It's someone's grandfather, it's someone's uncle, father, or in my case, my mum, her son. And no one should die of ignorance, particularly if it isn't of their own doing. So that's why I set up Moobs to kind of be the solution for that.
Yeah. So, that must have just been absolutely. I just can't imagine how crazy that must hit you like a steam train, getting something like that, news like that so quickly at your age. So for viewers and listeners, we're both the same age. We're both 37. Well, I think you're 37, or
Yeah.
I can't remember when your birthday is.
Yeah, you're always older than me, Tom.
Okay, yeah. So
Still trying to catch up.
but yeah. You must have been shocked in that regard. But what was your knowledge of male breast cancer prior to this? Because personally, I think I might have some kind of random vague knowledge that it could happen, but only as an incredibly rare instance. I wouldn't have thought that there would be hundreds of people just in this country getting it every year. What was the degree of your knowledge?
Honestly, absolute zero. And that's what I said. I didn't go to the doctors for 5 weeks. If I knew you could, then I would have booked that straight away. And I think, when you think about it, of course you can. Everyone has breast tissue, but as a man, you're sort of trained. Testicular cancer, prostate cancer.
Yeah.
But when it comes to breast cancer, the viewpoint is, well, that's a women's disease. That wouldn't affect me.
Yeah.
So we need to think about it. And it's like that thing I said to you previously before we started. You read a newspaper, and every single bit of information in that is aimed at women.
Yeah.
My knowledge was very little, and the few people I sort of talked to about it, because I've kept it quite close to my chest, pardon the pun, is that
have you used that? Have you used that? Are you using that in every interview?
I haven't, but I'm going to start using that. But yeah, so I kept it close to my chest. But the few people I did tell, and these are very well-read people, people who work in newspapers, and their viewpoint was like, I had no idea.
Yeah,
you could get that. So you don't have that knowledge, and if it wasn't for my colleague saying that, I probably wouldn't have even thought about it. And that's the scary thing. It could have come to July this year, and I could have thought, wow, this is kind of getting big, and I should get this checked. And that could have been too late.
Yeah, God. So you mentioned everyone's got breast tissue. I didn't know that. So is what are the differences in that sort of anatomy and risk factor between men and women?
So the more breast tissue you have, the more likely you're going to get breast cancer, essentially. So men typically have 1% of the breast tissue compared to that of women.
Right.
But we do all have nipple ducts as well, and that's where mine's located, just behind the nipple.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
Yeah. So we can obviously get on to what ramifications that has for me on treatment shortly. But in the grand scheme of things, the disease isn't different for men and women, but it might act different, and that's because of physiology. I think one of the things that kind of highlights this. So my cancer came back as genetic, so I'm a carrier of the BRCA2 gene. Which again, when you hear BRCA, you think breast cancer, you think women, you don't think that it affects men, because it actually affects men in terms of prostate and pancreas.
So just to be clear, so you've had genetic testing, and they have found a gene that is a risk factor for breast cancer specifically, but also affects other cancers such as prostate. So it's something that you've inherited, basically.
Yeah, essentially, and so you'd say that the chances were that I'd pick up one of these cancers. Obviously, more likely to have picked up the others than breast, but here we are. So if you're looking at the amount of breast tissue is 1%, that kind of is very close to what it is of how many diagnoses there are a year.
Right. Okay.
So because I had genetic breast cancer. So at the very start, I was told that I'd be having a single mastectomy, which is one of those things, you kind of, at least you're going to be alive, essentially.
Which is, just to explain what that is.
So a single mastectomy, again, it's one of those things which is better highlighted in women, and this is probably why we're trained for this. So you might see women who will have one breast removed, and they'll just have a scar, and they'd also remove the lymph nodes under the arms as well at the same time. So it's the exact same for men. They'll take all the breast tissue and the lymph nodes. So that was always going to be the plan. But I was always told that when it came to genetic, if it came back genetic, I'd need a double mastectomy, which is basically both off. And a lot of women actually opt to do this anyway if they find that they have the BRCA gene, because you can sort of reconstruct.
Yeah.
So that's what I was having. And then when you look back, it's not funny, but it's concerning in a way. I went from going from having a single mastectomy to a double mastectomy, then back to a single mastectomy, and then no mastectomy at all.
Right.
And the reason why is because in women, if you have the BRCA gene, you remove both breasts. That's just how it goes. And it was only in a meeting with my surgeon that they said about opting to do that I thought, well, I haven't really opted about it. And then I researched it, and I actually found genetically, when it comes to genetics, men are less likely to have a reoccurrence on the other side. So actually,
Right.
there's no evidence to suggest that men should have a double mastectomy.
Okay.
And this highlights another part of the reason why I've set up Moobs. It's to kind of close that knowledge gap. More funding into male breast cancer, because it's underfunded. And as I said, in comparison to how many women are living with it and diagnosed each year, I get it. But it's important that we know this information, because there's very, very little out there, and it's because there's so little incidences. It's like a cookie cutter approach of, well, this is what we do for women, so this is probably what we do for men as well, which didn't seem to be the case. So the disease acts pretty much the same for men and women, but there are sort of slight differences. But again, because we don't have the research, we don't really know what those differences are. We don't really know, what treatment is going to be exactly more effective. Because there could be treatments which react better with male breast cancer than female. It's just something that we don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, as you say, you can understand that the majority of, information, research would go towards female breast cancer because of the numbers. I mean, that's always how scientific, medical research works, right? Typically, they will invest the resources in the most highly probable cases. But so I've worked with a company who look for treatments for rare diseases, and you often find that there's these big gaps, because the ones where there might be less numbers do get neglected. So, I mean, it is really important to have somebody kind of flying the flag to close that knowledge gap, like you say. And clearly there's, yes, you can understand that there'll be more funding for the female version of the disease, but that doesn't mean that there should be nothing out there. It certainly doesn't mean that you should be reading that you need to buy a loose-fitting bra as a man. You would think that, I mean, that's quite, I mean, it's kind of, we both sort of laughed about it a bit, but
Yeah.
it is quite shocking. Like, did you find that was the case wherever you looked, that it was just all advice aimed at women and nothing aimed at men?
Look, I mean, what I noticed is, and this comes into changing the language, and not just the language, but the iconography around breast cancer, is, it's synonymous with pink. And, you think about Breast Cancer Awareness Month, I think it's been around for 90 years. It's been around for a very, very long time. And, back then it probably was seen just as a female disease.
Yeah.
But the thing is that hasn't changed over time. And, all the breast cancer charities, they will have, obviously, that men can get breast cancer. But, you'll look on a page and it's pink. And the only picture of a man on that page is a doctor.
Right. Yeah.
So it's one of those things. That's the stuff that kind of really needs to change, because, you're looking for information. And, look, like we said, we can sort of make jokes about it, but I can certainly understand people that can't. And there's a guy who I got connected with, strangely enough, through a friend who knew two people who had male breast cancer. It's just bizarre, I guess. And he didn't want to get involved or really tell his story, but he was happy for me to recount what he said. He's a big sort of fitness guy, very masculine. And he said, James, I've always seen myself as very masculine, but getting this was very emasculating. And he said, even now, there's only a couple of people, very, very close friends, the one who I had a mutual friend with, and very close family who know what cancer he had, because he was embarrassed about the stigma around it. Wow. And, he plays rugby, and he said he hides from his teammates because he's had a single mastectomy. And, that just kind of shows the taboos around it. And, there's no quick fix on this. People are going to perceive it as that for a very, very long time, despite what I do. I can keep sort of like, I've got a loud voice, as but I can only do so much. And I need to pass that baton onto the breast cancer charities, who really need to take this forward. I want to hear from people like Breast Cancer Now and Breast Cancer Research, and I want us to work together on how we change that language, because, it's a self-perpetuating thing. If nothing changes, then this is going to go on and on. And next year we'll have another 400 diagnoses. And I think one thing you said earlier about what's the difference between men and women's cancer, we don't have UK figures on this, but in the US, there's a recent study, and when I say recent, I'm talking about 4 years ago, that male breast cancer has a 19% higher mortality rate. And you can sit there and think, is that because men anecdotally don't go to the doctors, or, just aren't aware that breast cancer is a thing? But even if it isn't, it means that we need to research that. And it's I think it's something that we need to tackle quite important, like quickly, to be fair.
Yeah. I mean, do you think so? I think as men generally, we're all a bit more embarrassed about talking about health issues. Especially I can imagine if they're not traditional male health issues. So like if doing in your knee playing football, I'm sure everybody's happy, because that's a sort of blokey injury. It's like that's one thing, but talking about something that perhaps doesn't have the kind of male masculine like social kudos of I think we can be more embarrassed about talking about that stuff. Did you?
Yeah.
I mean, and it's very brave. I think that you're doing this and going like, look, I'm not going to swear for the YouTube. If you're listening, no swears here. But sod it. I'm going to go for this. But did you yourself feel a degree of embarrassment about the particular type of cancer that you had at the time?
You know what? I didn't think I did at the time, but I must have, because I realised on Friday, when I was on BBC Breakfast, it was the first time a lot of people would know the type of cancer I had.
Right.
So I think that does highlight it. And,
it was for me.
Yeah,
And
well,
obviously, we interact on Twitter, and you've mentioned cancer before,
yeah,
but that was the first time I'd heard that was what it was.
yeah. I mean that's exactly it. And you said about getting out there and doing it. I thought if I'm not going to do it, then how could I expect anyone else to? And I think it's quite funny when we're talking about the labeling of it all. We don't give gender stereotypes to other cancers. We don't hear of a woman having a female brain tumor and a male brain tumor or
Yeah,
male lung cancer. So why should that be the case with breast cancer?
yeah, yeah,
It's a silly point, but it's true. We all have breasts. Chickens have breasts. Everyone has breasts.
yeah.
It's just
But I mean, people don't know that though, do they? Like when you just said it in this conversation, I didn't realize that men had breast tissue. I think I would have assumed that it would be something to do with what, like the nipple ducts, like
mm,
you mentioned, or something around the pectoral muscle or something. I didn't know that men actually had breast tissue. So
mm,
that's just clearly one point of misunderstanding straight off the bat, right?
yeah, no, exactly. And yeah, I think a big part of it. You can only challenge those stigmas and taboos by raising awareness and challenging that language, and that's the bare bones about it. If you don't change that, we won't be able to change anything. And like I said, I think for me, I have had, since I've started this, had charities now reach out
Great.
to have meetings and talks. But you know, what's going to come out, then we'll see. Like I said, it's going to be a big ship to turn, and it's going to be slow. And we can't really have piecemeal here. It has to kind of be a fundamental change. We're in 2023, and I'm embarrassed about talking about having breast cancer.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny that we say we're all so aware of gender politics in
Mm,
every other walk of life. But
mm.
this seems, like you said, this seems to be something that we're, happy to be very gendered about, even though actually it sounds like we shouldn't be.
No, precisely.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So look, I mean, that's your journey has been, I mean, like, I mean, it sounds harrowing. Like, any cancer diagnosis must be horrendous.
Yeah.
But what was the so you what was the prognosis first of all, but then also what were the treatment options that were available,
Mhm,
and what treatments have you had? How
mhm.
are you doing now?
Yeah. So the prognosis at the very beginning was really really positive. It's quite interesting actually. One thing that I will say, I think when I went up to get my diagnosis, so I knew when I went there, and it came back very quickly, and I was taken to a different room. I thought, okay, I know what this is, and I actually think I might have had my little sort of breakdown when they told me they found something suspicious actually. And they always say, or it's always portrayed in films, or just in popular culture, that the world closes in on you and you don't take anything in. It was a complete opposite for me. My brain was just going at a million miles an hour, and it was just like, it's funny going at a million miles an hour, but everything was also very slow motion, and it was just asking all these questions just to kind of convince myself that I'd be okay. The really positive stuff was, she said, look, it's really, really aggressive. She said, but the good thing is that it's, highly curable. You're going to be fine. And so I was initially told it was going to be, because I also had it in my lymph nodes as well. So
Right.
the lymph glands are like filters. So if you get breast cancer, you're likely to have it there. It's like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. They go hand in hand and
Right.
dance cheek to
Okay.
cheek.
And so
Um,
that also affects that's the case for most cancers, isn't it? That they will check lymph nodes,
yeah.
and that affects the staging as well, right? So does that mean that you were stage two?
Right. No, so at this stage I was stage 3.
Right. Okay.
So the lymph nodes, as I said, they'll act as that filter. But cancer will go through, and that's how it spreads. So I was told everything is positive, and then you're sort of on a conveyor belt. And it's just test after test after test. And I had a meeting with my oncologist, and I was still waiting for some of my tests, my PET scan, most importantly. But I remember about a week after I got my diagnosis, I was just kind of getting my head around it and thought, this is going to be, a real get, but we'll get through it. And I remember I went up to work and I told a few people, and I was getting the train back, and it was pouring down with rain. Put into Brentford station, I got this call. I had this thing where I always had calls from the hospital, and I'd always jump because you don't know what the news is going to be. Like, honestly, it's terrifying. You know, for me as a publicist as well, my phone's always ringing, so it's not like I could put it away. And I was told they found lumps in my liver, in my liver and lung, and that my lymph nodes were up. And it was a liaison nurse, so she couldn't really tell me what this meant, but all I heard was like lumps. And then I met my oncologist, and my oncologist said, look, you know, she took me through what the treatment would be. So the treatment was always going to be chemo, surgery, radiotherapy. And she goes, look, I do need to tell you something. She was like, because your lymph nodes are up, it suggests that potentially it may have spread. And, you know, combined with the lumps that we found, we need to start preparing you for a terminal stage 4 diagnosis. Wow. And, you know, I think my question was like, we haven't even got the results yet. So I went away from that. Oh yeah, and then the treatment after that was like, you know, no chemotherapy. It was basically palliative care. And I had 11 days to wait until I found out that that wasn't the case. And probably the darkest moments that I had in my life. You know, as you can imagine, and, you know, the things that go through your head, you know, I just spent like hours walking. And I came to the decision like halfway through it that if it came back as terminal, because I hadn't told that many people, that if it came back as terminal, that I just wouldn't tell anyone, and when it came to it, I'd just take my own life. I didn't really want the sympathy around that. Yeah, it was pretty dark. And then, you know, coming on from that in terms of like the treatment, I was then told that it wasn't. I had an underlying tooth infection, and the lumps were really small in my lung and liver and weren't anything to worry about. So I had to get my tooth pulled out.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Man.
I know. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. But, you know,
tooth infection.
Yeah, which I didn't know about. So I had to get my tooth pulled out.
The best tooth infection you've ever had, I bet.
And you know, it's really funny. My next door neighbour got. It's funny how these things happen. She got the all clear from cancer the day I got diagnosed, and that's just you know really strange, serendipitous, as they say. And I told her, and we were jumping around, and I was like, I can't believe I'm celebrating I've got stage 3 cancer. But yeah, so then as soon as that happened, it was chemotherapy. So I was having one drug every other week called EC, which is really, really tough. And it was very, very full on. And halfway through, when it came back from genetic, they added an extra 12 weeks with a combination of 2 drugs every other week. So it went on and on. And I finished chemotherapy 6 weeks ago. Now, the thing that I'll say about chemotherapy, and it's interesting about the advancements we've made over the last 20 years. So the people I'd spoken to primarily had breast cancer or cancers and got treated 10 years plus. And in that time, the drugs have become much more targeted. So whereas before you were kind of blitzing your whole body, it's much more attuned to the certain proteins for specific cancers. So EC, which was the drug I was using, was particularly good for breast cancer, and that's the primary drug. Paclitaxel is another one, which I also took in the second half. But it's funny because, you know, I think we all have this perception, and again, it's all perceptions of cancer, about chemotherapy, that you're going to be throwing up constantly, walking around with like a drip, you know, looking gaunt and just looking terrible. But, you know, I had a thing called a cold cap, a cooling cap, and they're created by these guys called Paxman, like Jeremy Paxman. And I used this cold cap, and you wouldn't believe, I finished chemo 6 weeks ago. And my hair, I mean, Tom can vouch, I usually have much bigger and longer hair, but, you know, you'll lose a bit of it, but essentially how it works is it cools those hair follicles. And although you'll lose some, it also sort of promotes growth afterwards. You know, and this stuff just wasn't available like 10 or 20 years ago. So you sort of look at the advancements in chemotherapy sort of already and kind of where that can go forward. Yeah. You know, I think the whole concept of drugs delivery, actually, you know, for me, I would snap your hands off for the side effects, I had, but there are still side effects that I'm probably going to have for life. I can't feel my left foot, for example.
Really?
It's just one of those things. It's, you're having bouts of radiation, and the
Yeah.
more you have, the more it's going to affect you long term. I think my brain isn't what it was. I think during chemo, I had things like stutters. I still have complete blanks, and I don't know what I'm talking about, or I don't know what I'm doing. But in terms of drug delivery going forward, I think there's real hope within like nanorobotics. And I know you've talked about nanorobotics previously on this
I
podcast.
have.
But these DDSs, drug delivery systems, they could be taken orally or put into your bloodstream, and they're targeted between. They use your DNA, but they're also targeted towards the specific proteins. So they're guided by that essentially. Think of it kind of like a magnet, I guess. And what they're allowed to do is they'll be able to be so targeted that it won't affect all your other cells. So essentially, we're talking about a time that possibly in 10 years, chemotherapy is being phased out because you have these nanorobots that can deliver highly concentrated radiation just to those cells, the ones that need to be removed. And, there are trials kind of going on like at the moment. I don't think they've gone into humans yet, but the science is there. And I think that's really, really encouraging for the future of sort of treatment chemotherapy.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. I mean, so I for listeners and viewers, I know you know this, but so my dad had cancer and had various different stages of chemotherapy, and he had a similar thing to you actually. He said that he couldn't feel the soles of his feet, and the one bout he had was very very strong. I think they initially were quite targeted with it, and then it became more and more broad, and then he couldn't walk. He couldn't even control his hand. It was just his arms were moving. It was
Not fun.
yeah, it completely wiped him out. Yeah. And I think that is, as you say, as far as I understand it, because by that stage it was very broad. So it was, that. So I guess there's a relationship there between the degree of specificity and the severity of the side effects, right? And I guess it makes sense when you think about it like that. Like if you're able to zone in on exactly what you're looking for, then you don't have to hit all of the other cells that are doing other stuff that's not relevant, right? So I mean, nanobots, that's crazy. I guess that's just taking that concept to exact pinpoint accuracy, right?
Yeah.
And I suppose with stuff like the so I don't know if you have heard about the DeepMind protein folding work, where so Google DeepMind basically have solved the protein folding problem, so they can now visualize, they can map the shape of every protein, which would have taken I had a guest on a couple of weeks ago who was saying that it was like if you had a person doing it in a lab, it would have taken like 10 billion years or something, and they've just solved this thing. So I guess with that kind of technology, understanding the human body, and then the nanobots that you've been explaining, you can really zero right in.
Yeah, and I think actually what you just said as well about the modeling, I think we can't ignore what AI is doing at the moment, and so there's huge advancements in AI. We've really got that sort of watershed moment, and I think like as a publicist and loving the media, I'm naturally suspicious about AI, but I've had to come around to it quite quickly. But AI, in terms of, if you think about early detection, you can use AI and algorithms to essentially map your biology, and early detection. Look, with all cancers, it's always about early detection, and obviously that's why I'm saying that men need to be aware of it, and and be checking and stuff like that. But AI could essentially find this at like stage 1 and stage 2, and that's revolutionary.
So what would an AI have been able to do for you had it been around? Is it like imaging and then like recognizing irregularities in
Yeah,
like photo images?
I think there's a number of pathways that they're sort of looking at. I think for me, it's too late for me. I mean, if they were doing, because you don't know in terms of how this can be used, whether it will be something that's brought in at certain ages to check. So it's hard to say, and it's all hypothetical. But I think in the future, if you're doing regular screening and it was done through like a blood test or maybe like you say some imagery,
Yeah,
that's a game changer because
right.
essentially it would mean that before you're even on your journey you're already kind of past it because you've got these nanobots if required who could do that. But I think it also raises another really interesting point, and one of the things that is you probably would have read in the last 6 months, you're hearing these things about vaccines and immunotherapy.
Yeah,
And these advancements, I mean, you'll always say that technology advances as it's needed. And I think the greatest example is they always say about war, that during war, you'll always get the most technological advance. I think if you look at, nuclear fission and how that was applied since then. But, when you look at the COVID pandemic, probably the one positive that's come out of that is you had these big companies like Pfizer and Moderna working together full hog on a vaccine, and they found developments through that. And you heard the Moderna chief executive about 4 or 5 months ago coming out and saying we're going to have vaccines for cancers, and it'll be like an annual flu jab, essentially. And only I think just a couple of weeks ago, the government has signed a deal with BioNTech, who are a German company, with the promise of rolling out 10,000 immunotherapy vaccines against cancer by 2030. And so if you're thinking about AI, if you find AI finding a stage 1 or stage 2, and then you use one of these vaccines, which is targeted, then it could essentially mean the end of cancer. And I think just last week there's an Ohio-based company in Cleveland who have done a trial around breast cancer and vaccines, and it's essentially stopped this cancer from coming back. It's put it in remission.
wow.
So you can see and you can forward think about how that could affect stuff. I think for me, like I said, mine's come back as genetic, and there's a very high chance I'm not here in 20 years. So I have a very biased opinion of, biased viewpoint of all of this. But, I have to put my faith in AI, and I have to put my faith in these vaccines.
Yeah,
I'm hopeful that in 10 years it'll be a different picture. And, it'd be great if, if you think about it, if you get diagnosed with cancer and it's like, oh, I've just got to have a few days off work.
yeah, yeah.
It's one of those things. And, so there is a lot. We're on the cusp of a medical revolution. I can imagine working in the medical community. It's an exciting time.
Yeah,
For me,
yeah.
not so much right now. I'm, like I said, pinning all my hopes onto it. But I think there are so many advancements going on at the moment that which can only be a positive thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, I mean, hopefully they'll happen sooner
Mm.
rather than later. I mean, so have you heard of a term, longevity escape velocity?
No, I haven't.
So it's there's a longevity community, right? I had one of them on a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, I
He's
know
talk,
this community. I know this. We have a mutual friend called Andy who's obsessed with these people.
oh, really? Is he really? Oh God, really? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So Brian Johnson is the main kind of protagonist of
Yeah, yeah.
this world. Anyway, so this idea of longevity escape velocity is essentially where, um, like, you want to live long enough for, because he doesn't ever, his whole thing is he wants to drastically increase the human lifespan beyond 70 years or whatever it is
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
And so the idea is that you want to, if you can, if medical science can basically get to a stage where it's outpacing the human lifespan, i.e., it's adding more years on than humans are aging. There'll come a point where it's moving faster than any individual's life, right? And so his whole idea is that you need to reach escape velocity, live long enough to see the time where medical science has solved all of your problems.
Yeah.
Which is like that's whatever you think about that. But I guess each of us is on our own kind of run. It's almost like it's not a sprint. It's almost like you're trying to go slower than medical science, right? You're waiting for medical science to catch you up because we're all gonna get something at some point. Like, I mean, you've had this very young, and that's what's shocking about it, and what's very sad about it. But all of us are going to get something at some point, and so we're all in this kind of race with medical science now because of this explosion of technology. That if only it will catch us up, then we might have all of our problems solved by the AIs,
Everything will be
right?
fine. Everything will be fine.
Right? Yeah. I mean, yeah. Yeah. But yeah, because there is this explosion now of medical science with AI. So you mentioned immunotherapy as well. So is that only linked to vaccines, or is there other types of immunotherapy that aren't necessarily a vaccine? They're ways of like stimulating your immune system in other ways.
I mean, the ones that have been really taking those advancements have been vaccines, and that, as I said, is the
Right.
advancements that's been happening through COVID. New
Yeah.
techniques. I'm sure there are other ways of doing this that we maybe don't know about. I think there's always things that the people are working on, but isn't public knowledge. So I'm sure, like everything opens doors to something else. So with the vaccines, you could then think, oh, okay, well if that works like this, then maybe this can be applied like this. So yeah, I'm sure there's probably different ways of doing it, like way above sort of my knowledge base. But I think there's so much about immunotherapy and targeted immunotherapy that there has to be something to it. So yeah, hopefully it'll be one of those things that once my cancer treatment is finished, that there will be something where it's like an annual flu jab, and it's like, well, this is just to stop it from coming back. Because, like I said, when you've got it genetically, it's like I said, the chances are very high. I mean, one thing that I sort of think about the genetic side is, this is a gene that could be passed down, and I'm actually not sure how they do this, but I spoke to a genetic expert, and they were saying they can actually remove the BRCA1 and 2 gene in the embryonic stage of reproduction.
Wow.
So
That's amazing.
yeah, exactly. So you sit there and you think, if your partner is pregnant and you're worried about the gene, they can get tested, and if they have it, that can be removed, and then that solves the problem of the BRCA gene essentially.
I mean, do you remember when people used to kind of say, "Oh, designer babies," how awful would that be?
Yeah.
Actually, they've turned up, and it's not such a bad thing after all. I mean, that sounds pretty amazing to me.
No, exactly. And if
That you'd be able to do
think
that.
about, if my mum was offered that when I was young, when I was
Of
being
course.
born. So like, it's that's another debate about designer babies and all of that. But
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with removing a gene that could significantly limit the lifetime of your child.
No, God, no, no. I mean, geez, it's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. Like, I can't see any ethical concern with removing a gene that is just going to cause sorrow, heartache, and pain and misery.
And not just for that person, for everyone around. That's the thing.
Yeah,
Cancer isn't
yeah,
just a thing for the person going through it. It's for everyone,
yeah, yeah, for
everyone
sure,
around.
for
And
sure.
I think I said before, I said, cancer's isolating enough. And this again, it comes back to why I set up Moobs. If you don't have that tailored support, you feel even more alone. And
Yeah,
it's tough for your family to understand. It's everyone's affected by cancer at some point in their life. So if it's not them, it's someone they know or love.
yeah,
And yeah, it's just something that we need to get better at in terms of that side of
for
it.
sure. So Moobs then, your mission, it sounds like, is to improve knowledge, communication, support for male breast cancer. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, awareness is a big one, because that's the sort of stuff in the trenches on the ground that people need to know straight away. And like I said, I think that part is only by challenging that language and iconography of it all. So like I said, it's great that appearing on your podcast and doing things like BBC Breakfast and all those interviews is great.
Yeah, the big two, BBC Breakfast and,
You know,
and my
you realise
podcast.
I mentioned
You've
the
made it.
podcast. I mentioned the podcast first. But and that's all great, and but there's an old saying that today's news is like tomorrow's fish paper. It's a flash in the pan.
Needs to keep going.
Yeah,
Needs to keep
exactly.
going. Yeah.
The next thing now is I've got meetings booked in with these breast cancer charities, which is great. But let's see what we can actually do and to see if it's going to be lasting change. I suspect it's a bigger job than that. So for me, I mean, my aim for Moobs is for it to not exist in 5 years, and that's
Right.
what we've successfully challenged.
So what does the world look like at that point then? Paint me a picture of Moves, mission success. We're shutting up shop because we've done our job.
The first thing is, like I said, things like websites in terms of language. There are some charities who do it well, but these are usually secondary care, like sort of after cancer, rather than sort of the primary awareness side of things.
Okay.
I would like to see a move away from this synonymous with pink, because it's why I've chosen the colours black and white for my website, because I want it to be as obviously different to pink as possible. I want to see, how it's referred to in the press differently. I don't want to see things targeted at just women. I think during this whole, journey, we like to say the word journey when we get cancer, is that Fergus Walsh of the BBC was the only person that I heard as a journalist who said that men could get breast cancer. All the rest is just, women. So I'd like to see an end of the sort of gender specific, it should be non-gender specific. And that comes from all communications from charities as well, because I have seen statements from leading charities who I'm not going to name, who has said about the importance of women checking their breasts, and that should never be the case. It should be people should be checking their breasts, and it doesn't matter what gender you are, or everyone has breast tissue. So it's we have to be more, like I said, challenge that language and challenge the iconography of it all. And then finally, it's about sort of finding more information about breast cancer in terms of like funding, whether that be to private companies to sort of do it, or actual public like funding, So that's what success looks like. Success looks like me not being sat giving interviews about my own breast cancer.
And just quickly, before we wrap, so you've set up as a non-profit, you've done it all yourself while going through treatment, and I assume not working or working a bit, or like
sort of bits and bobs, but not it's hard, particularly with how my brain is at the moment, to be able to run big campaigns or
of course,
day-to-day business. But my agency's been like so super supportive in everything I've done. Give them a shout out.
Shout out Cow.
But they've been incredible, and so it allowed me that time to sort of kind of dedicate to kind of setting this up.
And how's it been? So what's I mean, look, agency life is insanely stressful, as we both know.
Yeah.
How does setting up a non-profit compare? Like, has it been a big learning process? Has it been actually more straightforward than one might think?
Well, the first thing I say is it's been a lifesaver. And I think particularly when I finished chemo, because with chemo, you're sort of like got a safety blanket around you. Whereas like when I came out of chemo, you then have all these scary decisions and stuff like that. So it's been a really good distraction in a way to kind of do that. So it has been a lifesaver, been something
that's interesting. Just to pick up on that quickly, you say chemo felt like a safety blanket. How do you mean?
So I think when you're in chemo, you just need to get through chemo. Right. You don't really think about, you live day to day in chemo, essentially. You're not really worried about the afters. And I think when you finish chemo, you sort of lose the sort of weekly sort of support with chemo nurses, which is sort of one, but you kind of lose that terra firma, the firm ground that you're sort of based around. So it's like having a bike and then having your stabilizer taken off. That's sort of how I found it. And actually, I found it quite difficult mentally to sort of deal with all of that, because then it's kind of like, okay, well, that's chemo, and when you're having chemo, you know that you're having treatment, and I guess like once that's taken away, you're sort of sitting there like thinking, oh, what's sort of next.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Back to real life, which
yeah,
is
in a way,
scary.
yeah, really scary, and I don't scare easily, but that's been quite scary. But I think it was one of those things that the idea came to me like that I had to do it now was when I got my genetic testing, because I was thinking about doing it next year. But maybe I would have been a bit further removed from it. So I wouldn't be able to talk maybe quite as convincingly about it, because I'm going through it now. So that was kind of July-ish time when I sort of thought, right, I've got to do it now. And I mean, in theory, you sit there and you know exactly what you're doing. But it is a big learning process, because everything's been done by me. I mean, the one thing I can do is publicity, because it's my job. But it was doing everything sort of around that. So it was, creating websites, learning how to sort of code a website, and I'm not really that way inclined. Like learning Photoshop.
AI can do that for you
Well, there
now.
you go. And learning how to do Photoshop and stuff like that, and just thinking of all these things, and then the hardest part, and I think I've been putting it off, was was writing my own press release, and
Right. Yeah.
it was really weird, because I was like, I'm a bit too close to it all. But I've written my press release, and I think one of the benefits is you don't have to wait for people to sign it off. You just sort of sat there. And
Yeah. You're the client. Yeah.
yeah, and it's really funny, like things like, oh god, I have to do a photo shoot, and I have to like approve these photos. It was just one of those things, and then I kind of
Yeah.
realised actually I can turn this around really really quickly, because I don't have to go through a long approvals process.
Yeah.
Um,
God, that must be great. Can't imagine how quick it must be.
I was sat there on Friday, and I was like, it's really funny actually, because like I never felt more tense doing this campaign. You're sitting there looking at like coverage, trying to like win it through, and I thought, do I give myself a coverage update? And like
Yeah.
have these things like, oh yeah, we're warm conversations with so and so, and yeah, PRing my own coverage.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but no, it's been an experience. I mean, look, anything is going to be scary, like going out on your own, setting out your own business, or anything like that. I mean, this isn't a business. This is a not for profit, and currently we don't have charity status. We are moving towards that. And that was a deliberate decision, because the idea was to launch it straight up as a charity. And I thought actually a good way of doing this maybe is setting it up as sort of a not-for-profit organisation, doing support and awareness, and then working with those big charities. And I want to emphasise the word with,
Yeah.
because I think there is a habit that these little sort of they can get eaten up by big charities. I think with the best intentions, and I have seen it not just in breast cancer, but initiatives that start out sort of being very independent, being eaten up, and then sort of kind of like adding to the problem, as it
Yeah.
were, and thinking, well, you had something great, and now it's turning to this. So I think one of the things that is very very important is I need to be quite protective over it. And it's a weird one, because I don't really want to be doing this. Also, Kat has just arrived, I can see. I don't really want to be doing this, but like I said earlier, if I'm not prepared to do it, then who is? And I think I sat there and I thought, I have the ability to do this, and waiting until next year is another 400 diagnoses who might go through the same thing as me, and yeah, so that's that's kind of where I was with it, and I've got surgery in about a week, and then it's kind of back to it, and sort of
Okay.
in that drum.
So on you then. So you've finished chemotherapy, you said,
Mm-hmm.
and finished or finished the latest round.
Finished.
Okay, brilliant. Well done for getting through that. I know how brutal it is from,
Mm-hmm.
as I said, family experience. So surgery. What have you got other treatment lined up? Like what's your status now? How What's
Yes.
the next
So
step?
I'm having something called a central excision. An eccentric excision is essentially, it's like a mini mastectomy. So it's essentially just taking away my nipple and like a bit more.
Right.
So it's not as invasive. So I'm having that first of all, and then radiotherapy at the end of the year, and then reconstruction. So
Okay.
there's a few options on the table in terms of nipple reconstruction.
Right.
I think a lot of it is, a lot of people sort of favour like a tattoo or something like that. Some people don't.
Okay.
Um, but for me, I would like a nipple back.
Fair enough, man.
I'm not too worried about the scarring, but I kind of want a nipple.
Sure.
So I've been looking at solutions. There's various solutions available where you can sort of
Okay.
kind of reconstruct that nipple. So
Okay. So then surgery, radiotherapy,
new nipple.
new nipple. Okay. Okay. Great. Well, look, is there finally, before we wrap up, is there anything that you want to put out there? Like, where can we find you? Any final thoughts that you wanna get on the record?
Yeah, I think the main thing is awareness. Men can get breast cancer. Like check. It's really it's easier for men to check than women because there's less breast tissue, and it's easier than checking your testicles as well. It's you're going to know your own body, and if there's anything there, nine times out of 10 it's going to be nothing, but just go. And the second one is, if you have any questions or anything like that, then go to www.moobs.uk, or on Instagram or X, it's at moobs_UK. Hopefully it's something that you're not going to need. But like I said, just know that men can get breast cancer, and even if one of your friends has found something, just tell them to go.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on. I think it's amazing to see what you've done, turning this horrible negative into a positive, putting the message out there. Lads, if you're listening, and I know that 95% of you on YouTube are men who watch my YouTube. So 95% of viewers, make sure you're checking your nipples and your breast tissue, looking for lumps. But James, respect. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you for having me.
Complete check.